Good evening, everyone. My name is Chiara Renzi. I am a psychologist working at the European Institute of Oncology for the iManageCancer project. What I will present you tonight are some preliminary data because we just finished, and we are finishing actually still, our pilot at the hospital. So I will talk you through what we did and what we're starting to find out. So first of all, the aims of the pilot that we ran were to assess the usability of the apps. So this is part of a bigger investigation on the usability of the iManageCancer platform, but also to evaluate the implementation of the platform in a clinical setting, so in a specific oncology setting with two populations of patients, breast cancer patients and prostate cancer patients. And then as a third aim, we wanted to establish whether the use of these apps had an effect on actual variables. So patient health engagement, which is the main endpoint of the pilot, but also psychological variables and value-based aspects. So these were measured interviewing patients about their satisfaction, about the hospital after the use of the platform, and about health-related costs. So we collected information of the costs that the patient had, both direct and indirect costs. So unfortunately, I will not be able to present you these data, but they will be available soon, and we hope that we can present them in a publication. So the study design is randomized. So we had two groups, an experimental group that used the iManageCancer platform, and then an informative material group. So it is a group that received paper-based information in a folder from the hospital. The sample had an equal number of, the two groups had an equal number of cancer patients, of breast cancer patients and prostate cancer patients, so they all had 32 patients. At the baseline, we collected information about the patient health engagement and about their psychological status. So we used the resilience scale for adults, we used the mini-mental adjustment to cancer, which is a measure of coping, and then we used the profile of mood states. Then for 6 to 8 weeks, patients in the experimental group were able to use the platform and to go through the apps, contact us whether they had bugs or anything. So they were allowed to, they were given a smartphone at the baseline. So they had a dedicated smartphone for the platform use. Whereas the other group went through standard care and they just received the informative material. Then at the end of this period, when the patient had the first clinical consultation, they had a new assessment with the same questionnaires that were run at the beginning of the pilot, plus the usability assessment for the experimental, for the electronic health, e-health group. Then after a few weeks, the patient went through the patient satisfaction questionnaires and the interview to establish the costs of healthcare. So as to now, we recruited 88 breast cancer patients and 47 prostate cancer patients. So you will see that the number of breast cancer patients is higher than expected because we recruited 20 additional patients at the end of the first pilot to try out a new modification of the platform. So this group is now followed very close, and this is why you see 20 more patients than expected. We have a recruitment rate of 46.5%, so this means that a bit less than half of the patients accept to participate in such a trial. So this is also a result that we should look into. So this means that not all, already at this stage, not all patients are interested in e-health. So from these data, we can understand better who is the target for e-health interventions. So we'll present you now with preliminary results that come from a previous analysis. So this is not based on all the patients. This is the This one is the most recent number. There are many issues related to this. One is, so this number is also related to the sample of prostate cancer patients. So this sample has a higher mean age much higher compared to breast cancer patients. So illiteracy, the technological literacy is much lower in these patients, so they tend to refuse more likely. So this is an overall number, but if you look at the prostate sample, the number is very high. And also later we'll present some data, some reports that show that some adjustments need to be done in order to implement e-health with prostate cancer patients. But also, in this case, I think a relevant issue is that patients could not communicate with the physicians in our pilot, because this would have made it a medical act, and the platform is still in a preliminary phase, so it is not a medical device. So this also might influence the recruitment rate, because a question that we received very often was whether they could send out pictures or they could communicate in this trial with a physician, and this is not possible now at this stage. The technology acceptance was not measured in the beginning. It was measured afterwards, so at the end of it actually. So specifically referred to the platform, but not in general. It was not the specific questionnaire for technology acceptance. And literacy was assessed in an informal manner. So we asked whether the patient had a smartphone, whether he used it, and whether he was able to download apps from his or her smartphone. So they needed to already have a smartphone in order to be recruited in the trial. We actually don't have many actual dropouts, like people who during the study decided not to participate anymore. So there are 6 out of 88 and 2 for the prostate cancer patients. So we asked what was the reason, and mainly it is because of the smartphone. So they say, I'm not using it, I want to give it back, or I'm not coming back for the clinical consultation in the time that was planned. So they come and they give it back before, because a lot of patients, also another thing that makes our pilot a bit particular is that a lot of the patients come from outside of our region, of our state. So this means that they travel a lot. A lot of them travel a lot to come to the hospital, because it's a comprehensive cancer center. So it is a hospital just for cancer therapies. And for this reason, if they decide to, for example, they might come, they have surgery, then they think that they can have chemotherapy in our hospital, and then because the waiting list is very long, in the end they might decide to have chemotherapy near their home. So some of them dropped out because they thought they would be able to participate and come back, but they were not, because sometimes it is a 1,000 kilometers travel to go to the hospital, and this is stressful. During the T2 interview, where we collected the costs, etc., we asked them also information about what they used, what they liked the best, about the platform. We have a semi-structured interview, so we ask them specific questions, but also leave them a bit of space for some relevant issues to emerge spontaneously from the interview. Now, in the analysis that we will run next week, we will divide patients in classes depending on the use of the platform. So those who used it once, those who used it more than once, and on classes of use. And we will analyze the data according to the classes of use. So we will try to draw a profile of different types of use for each app also. Because it might, from what we are getting, from the information we're gathering informally, we start to realize that different types of patients may prefer different apps. So I will report a little bit about this. So here you have some information on the use of the apps. So these were the people who actually used the app more than once at the preliminary analysis. So you see that the app that is used the most is the iManageCancer portal. So this is also the access to many features of the platform. So this is the most used. The second one is my health avatar, which is a physical activity and in general a monitoring tool for patients. Then you have the game for adults, and then you have I Manage My Health, which is more medically, I would say my health avatar is more lifestyle oriented, and I Manage My Health is more medical oriented. So from here we already start to see that there seems to be interest in this lifestyle support. Then we have some information about the problems report. So what was really useful also is that we could continuously get information on what was not working with actual users, because the information you get from workshops and from normal citizens might be different from patients. So we were able to collect a lot of information. So the numbers you see might have peaks because there were also peaks in the recruitment. So this is this is a timeline. It is not the week of use for the patient. It is an actual week of the year. So in that week, we collected, for example, 127 reports on small bugs and everything. And so periodically, the apps were updated automatically and re-downloaded on the patient's smartphones. Okay? So this means we actually were able to collect a lot of information from the pilot to technically improve also the apps. And then here is what we some preliminary information on what we started to hear from the patients. So the feature one of the features that they like the most is the search engine. So the provision of reliable, this is a feature of the IPHR, of the personal health record. They could, what they liked is that they could collect reliable information, because the difficulty that they often express is that they do not know what they can rely, what they cannot rely. So they liked the idea that these websites were selected by healthcare professionals, so they could search and find what they needed and trust it also. Then breast cancer patients reported that they found the monitoring features useful, so what concerned physical exercise, the sleep quality, the mood monitoring. So all these features related to lifestyle were really appreciated by women. So we are not sure it is because they're women or because they're breast cancer patients. So in order to disentangle this, we would need to run a pilot, for example, with lung cancer patients. These are interview reports, so it is not a quantitative data yet, but it is embedded in an app that is in general about lifestyle, but tailored to breast cancer. So they also have, for example, in the same app, they have information about the exercise that they have to do, for example, after surgery, or the types of exercises that they can perform when they get a particular type of surgery before or afterwards. And the same is for prostate cancer patients. So my hypothesis, which we might have to verify, is that they like the fact that they have the impression that this comes into a program that is about their cancer, but it does not talk specifically about cancer. And I'm telling you this because one of the things that they reported as an issue is that, so where you read stress, it is because they say reading, for example, iManageCancer reminds me that I have cancer. So the stress in the use of the app sometimes is generated by the fact that they have the impression that everything they're doing is related to their cancer. So I think that also they might have liked this because it is they're doing something for their cancer without talking about the cancer. So it is a way to actually feel empowered, because you are able to do something, whereas often when you speak about a disease, a patient does not feel empowered because he feels in the hands of the clinicians. So this is speculative, of course.
So you changed the title to I Manage My Health?
No, I'd rather say no, because they have in mind they're doing this for a reason, to feel better. But it is possible sometimes that we have also to think that these patients are in an early phase of cancer. So it is, if you see here, you have 41 regular admissions, 42-day surgeries. These are patients that are recruited at pre-admission time. So they are new to cancer also. So they are also in a psychological phase where they still have to adjust. They don't know yet. They come from the breakdown of the diagnosis, and they are in the phase where they are finding a meaning and finding a way to cope with it. So it might be different with patients who are going through chemotherapy, for example. So what I really, really want to stress is that we have to be really, really careful in every generalizations that we're making on the data from this pilot. So of course, I think we can provide very useful insights, but we have to be very careful in generalizing it to other types of cancers or to other types of phases. So we are in the process of collecting a lot of data also with the questionnaires that we developed in different phases to understand what is specific of a disease and what is specific of a phase and what is specific of other individual characteristics. So we can make assumptions, we can make hypotheses, but always I am very, very, I would be very cautious to say this holds for all. So it is a slow process to be able, unfortunately, to be able to make more general statements. But I think it is ethical to do it this way. We got two very different populations, and we could get different information from these two samples, because otherwise the risk is to be overly positive or to be overly negative. So in this case, it came out as a bit extreme, so two extreme pictures, but I think it is a good start. It is really a good start, and then we can, it can give us more information to try to implement it with other cancer diseases, such as bowel cancers and lung cancers. The third feature that was really liked is the physical exercise, but the one specific for surgery. So in the second phase of the pilot, we worked with clinicians to implement the physiotherapy exercises that IO physiotherapists prescribe to patients. And this is a feature that the patients liked a lot, because this reminded them of doing the exercise. It gave them a reference, so how should I perform it correctly? They often, so when they are discharged, they get overloaded with information usually, you know? So they stay in the hospital either 1 day or 2 days or maximum 3 days. And in this time, they get all the nurses' education that is possible to give them, and a lot of information gets lost. So having a reference, having something they could check if they were doing correctly, etc., was making them feel really more safe, more calm about doing this. Then, talking about the issues that we collected, there were technical issues that were reported, and these we expected this because we are in a preliminary phase in the use of the apps. There were some usability issues regarding features that could not be found, or information that they lost. They thought they inserted, but it was not there, etc. And then the lack of time and interest in the app. So after a while, some patients, they use it once or twice, and then they say, I don't see how I can use it. I don't see how I can make this fit in my life. And so the use decreases. And then some others report that they did not know how much time to dedicate to these apps. So this is giving us information about the fact that they're seeing the platform as a prescription. So I think we need to work a way to implement the apps in a way that is more. So in this case, the patients were recruited. So we went to the patients and we asked them to participate in this. So it is possible that this issue is related to the actual way that we are observing the data. So because we are recruiting instead of patients who spontaneously download the app from a Google store, for example. So we should take this into account when we do the trials with eHealth, that the simple fact of proposing a study is already a modification in the natural, in the ecological conditions, ecologic conditions. Yes. And then what I already reported is that the perceived usefulness of the platform is very low for prostate cancer patients. So we have very low use of the platform, and they say, I don't know how I can use this, I'm not interested, I'm too old for this. Okay, and then we had also, as experimenters, we reported some issues which could be a hint for the implementation with clinicians. So downloading and installing the apps. So this means that when the patient wants to download the apps, sometimes they come. Well, in this pilot, we downloaded the apps for the patient. So this was an issue, sometimes already for us. So the beginning of the intervention starts with the downloading. We have to be really careful in making this as smooth as possible. So this is a very important issue. So the first impact might influence the further use of the platform. So this is very important. Also, what we had to face was the technological literacy, which was not as high as we expected. But it is good that we start to do this now, because in 10 years, the future, unfortunately, patients to be will be much more familiar with technology. So this might change, and it is important that we are, even though this means having to contact more and more patients, it is important that we are prepared now to come with useful tools in the next decade. And then also the lack of adherence, of course, which is the use of the platform, which was not very high. And so we needed to check a bit with them. So the patients needed to be followed a little bit to understand what was going on with the apps and if they were experiencing issues. As to now, before we run the analysis, we can draw two hypotheses for further work. The first one is that we need to work on from a technical point of view to improve the immediacy of the apps and to improve the user experience. On the other hand, we need to understand and select the features that we present to the users, that we present to the patients, in order for them to be tailored to specific classes, be them users, be them as in demographic characteristics, as phases of treatment, or as goals. So one option could be, why are you downloading this app? What do you want to do? Why is this important for you? And to tailor the features that are presented to the user according to his goal. So this might be another option that is a bit different from the usual ones.